Okay, let me check. Hello, welcome to Self-Knowledge. Today we are having lecture number 15 of this free self-knowledge course that we are broadcasting live every Sunday through this page at this same time. Today we are going to talk about ego, personality, and essence. So we get to differentiate these terms, and we get to differentiate when the ego is acting in ourselves, when the personality, and when the essence. Okay. So let's start with today's lecture. And as I was saying, the objective of today's lecture is to teach us to differentiate the activity of each of these, to learn to observe and distinguish in each of our acts when the ego is manifesting, when the essence, and when the personality. To understand each of these, and we are going to analyze them separately. We are going to see what is the ego in us, what is the personality, and what is the essence, so that we learn to distinguish them and have a better self-observation. And we are going to see how each one of them manifest in us and how they lead us to act. Let me just fix something quickly here. Allow me just a second. Just a moment. Okay. And the first thing we are going to see before seeing each of these separately are the different acts that exist, since there are three types of acts. The first type of acts are the acts of the ego, or the recurrences, and this happens as we are not aware of our inner world, and therefore we are constantly letting our psychological defects, that's our ego, to manifest instead of our consciousness. This type of acts, the acts of the ego, are repeated over and over again, also generating that again and again we have to suffer their consequences that tend to be greater and greater, and that is called, the karma, as we learned in lecture number 13. And as we saw in the lecture where we talk about the law of recurrence, our ego has us repeating the same acts, doing the same things, making the same decisions, making the same mistakes, existence after existence. These are the acts of the ego, which keep us in that mechanical repetition day after day. We also saw in that lecture about the law of recurrence that thanks to this, we come to a new existence with a marked destiny, where everything that we are going to live is already written. Everything that is going to happen to us and how we are going to react, as we are constantly driven by the ego and we can only act under its mechanical condition. But there is also a second type of acts, and those are the accidents. This happen to us because we are asleep, because we are distracted, because we are fascinated. These are acts that are not in our line of destiny. For example, it may not be in our destiny line that we should be killed by a vehicle at the age of 25 years. But since in this existence we created the eye of the cell phone, that even when walking we are looking at the cell phone, then we cross the street without precaution and they run over us. And These types of acts, the accidents, are what cause new recurrences. Since, for example, in the case that I'm using to illustrate this, with that accident, a new recurrence is generated, and for the next existence at that same age, we will already be so absorbed with a cell phone or another technology, perhaps more advanced, but the defect will be the same and will cause the same action, the same accident to repeat again. These are the second types of acts, which are the accidents. And the third type of acts are the conscious acts. And these are the acts that will prevent accidents. Therefore, they will prevent new recurrences from occurring. And they are the ones that will allow us to get out of the ego's mechanic and free ourselves from recurrences and from their consequences. But actually, for conscious acts to take place, we must be making conscious efforts to wake up from moment to moment. Let's now that I explained this, see in detail, and as I was telling you, the ego, the personality, and the essence, so we can understand this better and we can go deeper into this. Let's first talk about the ego. Give me a moment. Okay. The ego is known by different names. Several of these maybe we have heard or already known, but maybe we had not recognized how all of these refer to the same thing, to the ego in us. For example, the ego is known as eyes. That's multiplicity that we are internally. Each one of our different ways of being that we can observe that manifest from moment to moment inside of us. Like, for example, the moody eye, or the flirtatious eye, or the impatient eye, or the distracted eye, or, for example, we can observe in ourselves the optimistic eye, or the lazy eye, or the envious eye, or the coward eye, the tyrant eye, plus an endless etc. These are our ego, all are different ways of being, and we can see that are multiple, that are actually a lot. We are now this way, but at another moment we are acting like that. At another moment I'm thinking like that. I'm feeling like this, and all that multiplicity inside of us is actually our ego. These eyes, or psychological eyes, in Buddhism, for example, are known as the psychological aggregates. That is another name for the ego. But also, the ego is known as defects or errors. You know, each of those flaws or defective forms that we can find in ourselves, and that as defects act in the wrong way, generating damage to ourselves and to others. Also, the ego is known as desires and temptations. You know, that which move in us and lead us to give in to our lowest instincts, and of which we constantly want to blame an external entity, you know, a Satan, an external devil. But when we manage to understand that what we call God and what we call devil doesn't reside in another place, if not within ourselves, then we understand that this devil, that Satan, or for example, the Seths, red demons, as they were known in the ancient Egypt, are nothing more than the ego that lives inside each one of us. In Christianity, they are called sins. And we know, for example, the 7 deadly sins, you know, laziness, greed, lust, pride, anger, gluttony, and envy. And these are nothing more than the 7 main heads of the legion that is our ego. But the ego is also known as injustice, as ignorance, pain, suffering. Those are also names for the ego, since it is the ego that causes us to act unfairly, that causes that we don't come out of ignorance into light. It is the ego, the cause that we constantly experience in this life pain and suffering. Also, the ego is known as inner darkness or trapped consciousness, and it is known as each of our concepts. All these are names that receive that which is the ego or the psychological I. So, to make this clear, or in short, the ego is everything that manifests itself in us and that leads us to make mistakes, to harm others and ourselves. Hatred, resentment, impatience, self-importance, selfishness, envy, violence, lies, betrayal, vices, sentimentalities, attachments, fears, concepts, beliefs, etc. that are manifested in us from moment to moment. All that is part of our ego and is what has trapped and conditioned our consciousness. And if we don't free ourselves from the ego, we will never develop our consciousness. So it is important to know all this. It is important that we get to understand what is the ego. Another thing that I think is important is to know that the psychological eyes are born from impressions not transformed in any of our existences. So every time that we are faced with a given situation and we became fascinated and we identified ourselves, we lose ourselves into that situation. We get out from the here and now and we lose ourselves into that situation and we put our energy into that I'm feeling, into that I'm thinking, into that I'm desiring, etc. There I'm creating, or each of my psychological eyes are created. And this, with the passage of time and with the passage of each of our existences, have been strengthened, since our eyes grow every time that, due to lack of self-observation, of self-awareness on our part, we let them manifest in us and they feed on our energy, on the energy of each of our centers, so they grow. We must know that the psychological I has a molecular nature, so it belongs to the fifth dimension, which is the world of the emotions and the world of our thoughts. And that is why in the physical world it is not possible to see an emotion or to see a thought, because they belong to the fifth dimension, although no one can doubt its reality. Likewise, no one can physically see the ego when it manifests from the fifth dimension, through desire and justification, but from there, from the fifth dimension, acting as a desire and acting as a justification in our mind, it takes over our personality, that we are going to talk now what exactly is the personality, and through it, it takes our physical body, leading us to act based on the conditioning of the I that is manifesting itself, and leading us to make mistakes and leading us to generate karma. It is important to know that also that each of our psychological I has its own personality. Each of them has their own particular way of being. We can see that, for example, our angry I manifests a very different personality than our loving I or our happy I. So we can see that each one of our psychological I's that forms our ego are totally different, and everyone have its own personality. Actually, if you have any question about this topic that I'm talking today and about the ego, you can write it in the chat and I will be solving any question you have regarding this. And if you have any comment, you can also leave that in the chat. Another thing that is good to know about this ego topic is that there are new eyes and also old eyes. In these last existences, we have created many eyes that we didn't have before. For example, in other existences, we didn't have the eye of the telephone or the eye of the cell phone. You know, that eye that needs or that feeds on all the energy that we give it by spending hours and hours in those devices until we become addicted and we already feel anxious if we leave the cell phone, and we suffer terribly if we lose it. So we have created the cell phone eye because we have fed that eye with all our energy. Now we feel that actually now we are like addicts to those devices. But also in this existence, we have created selves like the driver or the video gamer or the movie watcher or the one who watches pornography or the one on social networks, etc. Those are eyes that are new, that in past existences we probably didn't have these eyes. And we see how all this supposed advance that we are living, that we see in technology, make us have a false illusion that we are evolving, when internally it is actually precipitating us into involution. Since if we reflect on it, we realize that these advances have served us to degenerate us more and more. And with these new eyes, feed even more all our old eyes. And we actually have very old psychological eyes. We can see, for example, the eye of laziness. That is, we can say, the father of all our ego. We can see among the details of the eye of laziness, we can see very old eyes such as the idle eye or the pardon eye or the I amuse myself or the I am bored or the disobedient eye or the distracted eye. All those are like details of the eye of laziness, and they are actually very old eyes. And if we analyze it, we see how these new eyes that we are now creating and that we are now feeding actually end up feeding the old eyes. We could put, for example, the eye that play video games, and we can see how this one not only feed many very old eyes of laziness, such as leisure and distraction, obviously, but it also comes to feed very tough eyes, just as our murderous eye, or our revenge eyes, or our cruel eyes, or our thief eyes, etc. Since in that virtual reality, we do everything freely, and we are indirectly feeding many times the heavier eyes of our psychology that perhaps we, because of our actual personality, no longer manifest directly, but we can actually get to manifest them, as we see that someone who is constantly feeding these eyes of violence through, I don't know, maybe movies or maybe through a video game, actually can end up with very tough, violent reactions or ways of things. So actually, we are feeding with these new eyes, very old and very tough eyes. And we can see with this that the eye just like evolves. Even in a single existence, we can verify the evolution of an eye. We can talk, for example, I give you here an example with lust. You can see just in a single existence, you can see that the first time that lust manifested itself in us, in this existence, it was probably just, like the peeping eye or the lascivious eye. Then you see how it goes, or it went evolving, and then appears the eye that watches porn and the masturbating eye later. Or then later appears the eye that fornicates with a partner. But then not only vaginal fornication, but also oral sex and then anal sex. Can even in the same existence, this eye of lust evolve so much that passed to the homosexual eye, or later to the celibate eye, and then to the pedophile eye. So we can see as the eye always evolves in its degeneration. And in each existence, they increase their molecular weight and make their force of manifestation become greater. If we never decide to work on them and to eradicate them from our psychology, they will always tend to work and to evolve, developing different ways, tougher ways to manifest in us. But it is important to know that all the eyes can be eliminated. That unfortunately. And to do so, it is necessary to be in constant wakefulness, in a constant state of self-observation, in order to discover all these different eyes that manifest in us and that are manifesting as a desire in our emotions, in our mind, in our words, in our actions, but also in our omissions. And to observe what it does and why it does it, when it does it. And thus, from moment to moment, we must understand that these that are manifesting through us are just egoic manifestations, and we must consciously eradicate them from us. For that, we have in our interior, in our consciousness, the part or a force that is in charge of eliminating all the different wrong ways of being that we already comprehend. It is ego, and we want to eradicate it, and is our divine mother. Here you can see like a representation of that part of our consciousness. And every time we observe ourselves, and every time we find in our emotion, for example, wrong emotion, anguish, anxiety, hate or hatred, and we find a defect in our mind, a wrong thought, justification, something insane that is going on in our head, or actually we find ourselves speaking or doing something that we know it is wrong, that we can get to observe and we get to comprehend that it is our ego, we must ask our divine mother to eliminate that from within. You can ask, it's very simple. You find you observe the eye and you ask yourself, divine mother, eliminate this defect from me. And that way, you are going to see how you are going to be liberating consciousness, and you are going to be freeing yourself from all the manifestations of the ego. Actually, that is very important that we start to observe ourselves as there we are going to realize that this is true, that actually the ego moves in us from moment to moment. This procedure that I just explained is called psychological death, and it is the one that will free ourselves from the ego, and that will allow us to release the essence, release that energy that will serve as raw material to create ourselves internally and to achieve what is called the second birth. But what happens? All the eyes can be eliminated, that is true. They can be eliminated voluntarily by doing this work that I just explained. But if we don't decide to work on ourselves in the elimination of our ego voluntarily, then when our human existences are exhausted, we will have to go through a process that is known as involution that we saw in lecture number 8. And there our ego will be eliminated, but involuntarily. And there in involution, all the eyes will die in a painful and hard way. And from that process that I passed through the 9 Dantian circles, and this process can last in thousands of years, but from there our essence will emerge clean, but without having been able to rescue the wisdom of that turn on the wheel of samsara, as we explained in lecture number 8. In case you didn't see that lecture, you can go here in the page to the video section and you will find all the lectures that we have seen so far. Once the spark get out clean from the involution, then it's going to be ready to be connected again to the wheel to turn one more time to create ego, and when achieving the human kingdom, to have 108 opportunities to try to achieve self-realization, to in one of those 108 existences to make the work of awakening the consciousness by voluntarily eliminating all the ego. And it is very important to understand that the need to eliminate the ego in one existence, in this one, in order to free ourselves. The I makes us commit many mistakes. It depletes our energies. It causes all kinds of recurrences. It keeps us repeating the same lessons over and over again. It prevents us from making any progress towards our being, towards the awakening of our consciousness. In order to observe the manifestation of the ego in us, we must realize that all ourselves manifest as desire. If we get to understand that, we can easily observe our ego. We must begin to observe the different desires that we feel during the day, to discover the I that originates that desire, and to understand the consciousness that is trapped in that defect. And we actually feel all kinds of desires during the day. You can feel, like, for example, desire to drink, or the desire to fight, or the desire to flirt with someone, or the desire to do nothing, that is laziness, or the desire to masturbate, that is lust, or the desire to criticize another, and that can be, for example, envy, or that could be, for example, a pride or self-importance. If we learn to deny the constant desires of the ego, we will stop being slaves of desire, and we will rescue from the death of the defect light, which is wisdom, and fire, that is love, that is encouragement, or that capacity to do. That is the importance to work on ourselves, to eliminate each one of our defects, to deny ourselves to all the desires of the ego that we constantly feel, because they have trapped our light and our fire, which is our capacity to love. Actually, this is the ego. If you have any question, if you didn't understand something, you can ask in the chat, and I will be answering all the questions you have regarding this topic. Let's now talk a little about personality. Let's see what personality is. Personality, we could say, is an energetic vehicle that will allow our psychological defects to manifest in us. Actually, our personality is like that facade, like that mask we use to show ourselves. You can see that when a baby is born, it doesn't have a personality created. It doesn't have like a way of being. It simply is. And for this reason, the psychological defects cannot yet manifest themselves in the baby. That is why the little baby enjoys that beauty. In the baby, only the 3% of free and consciousness is expressed. That is the reason why the little babies are so beautiful, because as they don't have a personality created, the psychological defect, which is the ugly in us, cannot manifest in them yet. But what happens that as the children grows, he creates the personality, and then he is already forming a way of being, until at approximately 7 years old, he has completely created a personality, which of henceforth it will be strengthened for the rest of his life. And through the personality, all the psychological eyes can openly enter the person. Something that is important to know is that the personality is born in time and it dies in time. There is no future for personality. It is formed in each existence so that the eyes can manifest in the physical body. And with each physical body, we create a new facade, a new personality, with a new name, a new surname, with certain education, certain economic position, certain culture, certain tastes, interests, customs, habits, etc. And in each new existence, we create a totally new personality. And with the death of the physical body, also comes the death of that personality. But we must know how the personality is formed. And the personality is formed through imitation. You see what children see, children do. The child observes and is like a sponge, absorbing everything that sees around him. And the child imitates what sees his parents, his siblings, friends, etc. are doing. The child, for example, sees that everyone is talking on the cell phone, and what does the child? It takes a toy and starts talking on the cell phone. And if on the top of that the child is celebrated and applaud it like yay, great, then the child begins to assimilate that behavior as appropriate. And the child begins also to imitate the accent, the way of speaking, the gestures, but also begins to imitate the reactions of others and begin to get a concept about what is right and what is wrong. If he or her sees, for example, that the mother screams all the time, that gets angry, that reacts violently, then the child internalizes this and then repeats it according to the electropsychic design that the child brings. Or for example, if sees that the father all the time strives for money and that the father looks down on people who don't have money, then the child begins to assume as part of his personality that not having money is wrong and that it is something to be ashamed of. And so on, he grows and he imitates his friends from school, his acquaintances, and other relatives, also imitates what he sees on the television or what he sees on YouTube, and is creating his personality or his way of being. The child begins to develop new concepts, ways in which it identifies itself. And all those things are what form that is what I am. I am like this. We say I am like this, and actually this that we created through imitation is our personality. And from there we began to say that, or we began to defend this personality. We began to say that the best music is the one that I listen to, or the best country is mine, or the football game, or the the religion that I practice is a true one, and a lot of other concepts that are defended to death because you feel that by defending these concepts you are defending yourself, because you are losing total connection with our own spirit, with your own consciousness, and you are identifying and defining yourself by the personality. Actually, you get to believe that all those talks are what you are. And you start being very conditioned by what others will say. And that is a very important, let's say, part of the personality. We can actually define personality, or we can find our personality in that need of be safe about what others will say, because we feel the need to defend our personality. We do things, we behave in a certain way, we show that facade, that mask, that is a personality, to have a reputation, so that the best is said of us, so that they hold us in high esteem, or also for fear of criticism or for fear of being rejected by the other people. But this personality has multiple fractions. It has many ways of being. Since each, as I said, each psychological I has its own personality. Because you can see that the aspect of our personality that arises when one is happy is totally different from the one that is expressed when one is sad or bored or angry or scared. So our personality today is just a servant at the service of all or of each one of our psychological eyes. And the problem with personality is that it keeps us hypnotized, thinking that the things of the world, the vanity, the money, prestige, luxuries, profession, businesses, appearances, are the important thing in life. Since from we were little, they made us see that the important thing in life was, for example, money. And then that child grows up fascinated with the things of money and with the ways of making money. And that is where his life goes. Or if we were taught that the important thing in life is the family, then we grow up fascinated with all the family things and the family problems and having a great and a beautiful family and so on. Or if we were taught that the important thing in life is to stand out, then you spend your whole life looking for how to stand out from others. And you become fascinated by these things and forget what is really important, why we are here. That is the problem of the personality, that we get so fascinated with the things of the personality that only belong to time, that as the personality will die in time, that we forget what is really important, why we are here. And that is the development of one's own consciousness. That is the reason for being here. This is how we lose all the time of our existence behind vain goals which fade with times. For that reason, it's good to know that there are two types of personality. It is very important. There is the active personality and the passive personality. The active personality is what most of us have, and it is at the service of our ego. For example, you can see that if our lust want to be manifested, the personality will look for a way to make lust manifest, but in an appropriate way. For example, we see someone we like. We are attracted to that boy, in my case. And lust, or my lust, wants to go directly to have sex with that person. That is what my lust actually wants. But my personality will look for a way to talk with that person, to seduce that person, to promise that person love, fidelity, and who knows how many other things that are behind, or that have behind the intention of going to have sex with that person. Thus you see that the personality helps each of the psychological eyes so they can come to manifest in themselves, but in a right way. So we are like, fine, okay, good. But actually there is another personality, and that is the one that we must develop, and that is the passive personality. And it begins to develop when the person learns not to be so reactionary, to not immediately do what the defect says, but to break down. For example, when a desire manifests, what this passive personality do is that it judges this desire. For example, is if someone proposed you a shady business where you're going to earn a lot of money, but instead of reacting immediately, saying yes because of your greedy eye, or say no because of what your parents would say or how people will treat you if they discover you doing this kind of stuff. One is the ego, another is the personality. But instead of reacting, you observe, you reflect, you observe the defects that are manifesting in your mind as justifications. You realize that they are manifestations of your greedy eye or of your thieving eye, and you actually observe them and you eliminate them. Then you begin to develop a state of passivity, of receptivity to the consciousness. And if you stop being so reactionary, you are giving way to consciousness to manifest. So we can actually see that consciousness is something very different from the ego and from the personality. And it actually comes out of self-observation, of when we judge ourselves and we get to eliminate what is wrong in ourselves so we can let what is conscious to manifest in any given situation. Actually, that is the personality. Those are the two types of personality, and by reflecting, by observing ourselves, we by denying the desires of the ego and the desires of the personality, then we are going to let the essence manifest. And let's now see what is the essence. The essence is what is true, what is real, and what is immortal in each one of us. And it is the only thing that is truly worth anything in us. It has been the same from the moment we left the sacred absolute sun, and it is what we really are, outside of the ego and outside of the personality. And contrary to the ego and the personality, the essence doesn't belong to time, nor does it die in time, but it is eternal and it is permanent. It is not conditioned by what others say or by what others think, like the personality, but it will always act in a conscious way, based on what is fair and what is useful and what is true. It will always seek the awakening of all our consciousness. We must know that 100% of our essence is immortal, but it is divided into two parts. 3%, which is self-conscious essence, cannot be trapped by the ego. Actually, the 3% is our inner master that we are going to be developing as we work on ourselves. And there is another 97% of our essence, which is actually trapped in each of our psychological eyes, in each one of our psychological defects. When the essence is free, as the 3% is, it is called consciousness because it has wisdom. It is called essence when it's trapped because essence comes, from innocence. And just because of its innocence, because it wasn't self-conscious yet, it was trapped by the ego with the purpose of being released by us to rescue wisdom from the ego. Actually, that part, that 97%, is what is called essence. And the work we have to do is first to awaken the 3% because we have it actually asleep, in order to start releasing the trapped essence and make it conscious. And that is the reason for existence. And we are going to awaken our consciousness by working on ourselves, by working on the three factors for the revolution of the consciousness that we have been explaining in this course: psychological death, spiritual birth, and sacrifice for humanity. That is the way to awaken our 3%. And we must know that, or we must remember that when we were little and the personality had not been formed yet, this 3% of consciousness was still awake. But to the extent that we left so many concepts at home, school, at church, with friends, with what we saw on TV, and as soon as we get fascinated with this world and all its illusions, this 3% of consciousness fell asleep, and we forgot the objective of existing. And we stopped listening to the voice of the consciousness. Actually, there is something inside us that is constantly like calling us to remember, to is constantly calling us to wake up, to listen to this, to make this work. And this is something, this is our consciousness trying to awaken. And actually, now what we have to do is seek to awaken that consciousness, and we are going to awaken that by practicing, as I told you, the 3 factors for the consciousness revolution. And then we are going to start liberating, working ourselves, the 97% of trapped and conditioned essence. Because what is the essence looking for? What is the purpose for the essence? Against the desire of the ego and the personality, the essence will always seek to liberate all consciousness through the practice of psychological death, will seek to merge that liberated consciousness to that 3% through the practice of the spiritual birth that we teach in this course. And the essence is also going to seek to help, or to help the other brothers of humanity to awaken by consciously sacrificing time and effort for giving them the teaching of the 3 factors of the consciousness revolution in a disinterested way. That is what the essence is looking for, making his path to the that source from where it came from. And actually, our personality, you can see that it's not looking for this. Personality is looking for fame, for prestige, for money, for luxuries. Our ego is looking for pleasure, pain, pleasure. The ego goes always from pleasure to pain. The personality is looking for appearances, for vanity. But actually, the essence is looking for, is looking to awaken, is looking for develop the spiritual part in us. That is why this lecture is for. That is what this lecture is for. To make us differentiate the ego, the personality, and the essence. And to finish this lecture, I want to give you an example where we can see clearly how to differentiate when the ego acts, when the personality, and when the essence. And this is the example. Let's say that we are going down the street and we meet someone we didn't want to see because we owe that person some money. That is the situation that occurs. If you observe yourself in that situation, you can see that the ego is all that reaction that arises within us. You know, desire, the desire to hide, the annoyance, the anger at having found that person, the hatred that it generated in us. There you can find your ego, the shame, the desire to lie. All this is a manifestation of the ego in that situation. But if you observe yourself, you can, in that situation, see your personality acting. And your personality will be that facade that we put on, that mask. Because we find the person, and even though we are feeling all that inside us, we smile. We greet that person politely. We ask about his family with a horrible feeling of annoyance inside, but we put a pleasant face. And when they ask us about money, about the money we owe, then we start to lie and do. We start like playing a movie about why we haven't paid that money yet. And there you can easily see all the ego acting, and you can see how the personality is at the same acting. Now, how the essence would act in that situation? That is a good question. And we must remember that the essence lives in function of the three factors. Then the essence will be in constant self-observation and psychological depth. So the essence, what is true in us, will observe and will immediately eliminate the anger, the annoyance, the hatred, the desire to lie, the desire to hide. But we also observe the personality. It will eliminate the hypocrisy, that false smile, that false attitude, the lies, and will rescue from that process a lot of wisdom, a lot of awareness, and will act in this situation without conditioning, neither of the ego nor of the personality. It will act in a conscious way. The essence will resolve the situation in a conscious way. It cannot be like pigeonholed into a concept. How the essence will act, since the essence that is the real, that is the truth, is what is unknown from the moment. And only by seeing ourselves in the situation and eliminating all the manifestations of the ego, we will discover what will be the conscious action that will arise. It will, we could say that by eliminating all the ego manifestation and the personality manifestation, we are going to act just saying the truth to the person. That is something that is very probable. But as the consciousness cannot be measured, cannot be conceptualized, consciousness is actually above good and evil only when living it, only when experiencing this directly, by practicing the psychological depth, letting the consciousness, letting the essence to set free and manifest, we are going to discover what is that is called essence and what is that is called consciousness. And well, that is just example I wanted to give you. I hope you understand the difference between the ego, the personality, and the essence. And this is today's lecture. And next Sunday, and I want to invite you, we are going to be talking about self-observation. And this lecture that we saw today will help us a lot to understand the next lecture, to understand the self-observation, as self-observation is a practical means to achieve a radical transformation. So don't miss next Sunday this very interesting lecture about self-observation. And well, this has been all for today. As I said, if you see this video and you have any question regarding this topic, you can write it down, and we will be solving all your questions there in the chat. Any question you have regarding this topic and regarding this self-knowledge course. Thank you very much, and see you next Sunday. Ciao, ciao.